He is the Wikimedia coordinator for Europeana and founder of GLAM collaboration projects in the Wikimedia community. He was the world's first Wikipedian in residence. Okay, I don't know whatever it does mean. I think you would tell. At the British Museum and Global Cultural Partnership, coordinator for the Wikimedia Foundation. He's also worked with Creative Commons Australia and was the inaugural social media coordinator for the National Library of Australia. He has the UNSW University Medal in Historiography for his thesis, which is Wikipedia's academic lineage, and the Masters of IP Law from WIPO. Over to Liam.
Thank you. नमस्कार, यहाँ पर बुलाने के लिए धन्यवाद. I also wanted to, before I give my presentation, I wanted to address, does this also work? This also works, yeah. I wanted to address the question that was asked about Sebastian's presentation, because I don't think that should be left open, unanswered, on the basis of the laughter from the room, which I don't think was appropriate. We know that artificial intelligence and IT in general is heavily male-dominated as an industry, and we know that algorithms derived from artificial intelligence are heavily sexist and heavily racist if the community that builds them are monolithic. So I applaud an organization, it's not my organization, but I encourage that organization trying to diversify its group of the people making the algorithm. So please don't laugh when someone is trying to hire a larger diversity of people in academia and IT. So, with that, my presentation. I will be talking about open and communities, in respective order. What I see is the flow of the idea of open in the cultural sector, and then also comparing some of the trends in the concept of community as it is seen through the various digital libraries that exist, NIDL, Europeana, etc. Obviously, these are my opinions, and I encourage other ideas, comparisons, suggestions. Open. So the idea that a museum or a library or a cultural organization should be open is not new, is not controversial. The British Museum in 1759 was founded on the principle of being available to all studious and curious persons. And Wikipedia was founded in 2001 with the phrase you are hopefully now familiar with, free access to the sum of all human knowledge in your own language. I think these are the same idea. They are both about the concept of openness, being open, but they have a completely different, a much more complex definition of open as time goes on. Both of those were actually opened on the same day in January 15, more than centuries later. But the trend of being open continues. However, what was once merely having open doors, being physically available, if you were rich enough, if you lived in the city where the organization is, has now become a much more technically detailed and higher barrier to entry to be defined as officially open. The organization opendefinition.org defines open now as open data and content which can be freely used, modified, and shared by anyone for any purpose or any reason. They are all technical standards to meet. It is not merely the fact of the information being there, but that you can reuse it, you can sell it, you can interpret it and interrogate it. This is a screenshot from a spreadsheet by my colleague, Douglas McCarthy at Europeana. where he and his colleague Andrea Wallace have been for several years collating the open data policies of various cultural institutions around the world and trying to map them. What is the policy? What is the standard? What information does it apply to? What license does it include? There are at least a dozen different definitions, different formal licenses that different museums describe as open in there. No one has tried to compare them before, so putting them in a list where you can say that some organizations say CC0, some say no known copyright, some say CC by SA, we need to be attributed, non-commercial only, education reuse. The consistency or inconsistency within and among those is a technical standard, a barrier to a higher entry than merely having a front door that is available. I should also point to the Europeana's own public domain charter, which specifies that you cannot and should not try and add copyright or licensing contractual rules on top of the original object when providing a digital surrogate. Many of these organizations do, even though they would say they are open access and open technically. Again, my colleague Douglas made this research with the famous painting, The Great Wave. This is a print, which makes it useful for research because it is printed in the original print and available in multiple organizations. They all own an equally valid original. And he made a comparison of the ways those various institutions provide access and consider their collection to be open, from the most to the least, or least to the most open, in a huge variety of legal, contractual layers. Also, the actual scale of the digital version. Some gave huge files in TIFF format, some gave very small thumbnails, some required personal registration, the provision of a credit card number, what's your email address, phone number, etc. So openness is not merely a question of copyright license, but contractual agreements, accessibility of the website. Is it in my language? What file format is it? Do you tell me that I can't use it for certain reasons, even though, obviously, this particular original work does not have any copyright to the original. The author is long dead and existed in a period of time and in a country that did not have copyright in the first place. So I encourage you to play with this spreadsheet. I will tweet the link to my slides immediately after this presentation if you wish. My Twitter account is Witty Llama, and you can download the slides from there. Most of the time, openness is thought of as a good idea in theory, but when it comes to the practice, the cultural institution decides to retain control, often for reasons of, and I quote, preserving the integrity of the collection. The idea of physical control and coordination of the objects in a catalogue, in a collection, in a museum repository is important because the original object needs to be preserved. And that is true. But the same does not apply for the digital surrogate. It cannot be destroyed in the same way an original object is if everyone touches it. So the idea of preserving, controlling access, not being open in a digital version for a motivation of preservation is, I think, a mistake, and often it is a falsehood because the institution itself does things which it would not consider allowable, appropriate with those collection items if others did it. This is my favorite piece in a gift shop in the world to examine that idea. If someone else tried to sell that object with an officially licensed version or a freely taken version of that painting, the organization itself would be very upset as it is not respecting the original artwork. but if it does it itself, that's okay. So I think these arguments about digital control based on preservation of integrity, hiding behind the artist's intent, is not correct, or is often a fake excuse. We also have questions of non-open access, not for deliberate reasons, but not through maliciousness, but just through not considering digital access to be a valid form of engagement with the cultural heritage. We consider free access and availability to a cultural organization in person to be a citizen's right. I can enter a museum or a library and access the collection because I'm a citizen. That is, it's a public institution. But when it comes to the digital library, we consider it to be fair game. These are examples from my visit to Kolkata this week of the National Museum and the National Library. Various unintentional examples of non-openness, where the Odia collection is available only in a card catalogue if it's before 2004. After 2004, it's in OPAC. And this is a question of resources and money and time, but if you are not in Kolkata, how do you access this? There's a beautiful collection of glass jars in the National Museum of liquids. Well, what are they? I don't know. They are beautiful, they're interesting, but I don't know what they are. I can't interrogate that information even when I'm in front of the object. It's just a series of pretty jars. It's an artwork. It's not a museum collection in that context. And if I'm online, if I'm not in Kolkata, these jars have been preserved there for probably more than 100 years. Who has researched them? Who has access to that information? Why are they on display? Tell me. I want to learn. This object from the National Museum collection has been removed for official purposes since 2017. What object was it? What does it look like? As a citizen, you have the right to be able to access the collection. If it's not on display for cleaning or it's on loan, fair enough. There are valid reasons for moving things in and out of collections. But simply removing it and not providing an alternative is a breach of the rights and responsibilities of a national cultural institution, in my opinion. This is my entry ticket as a guest, as a visitor to the National Library. It was printed 2 lakh times in 1998, which means they have not had more than 2 lakh visitors since 1998. As Ben mentioned, part of the Wikimedia strategy over the next period, one of the 2 main pillars is the idea of knowledge as a service. Knowledge as an infrastructure layer to the internet and to society in general in many languages. It is a platform that serves citizens, not customers, humans, not products. 2 museums in the Netherlands, taking this similar idea, noticed that some of their most famous paintings were not being represented in the wider world in the manner that is correct. Many of you are probably familiar with these 2 paintings, but the institutions that own the physical object were very controlling, very careful about the digital display. They wanted to maintain the integrity, the authority, the official version, their high-resolution scan for themselves, for correct use. As a result, the community online found other less good versions of these paintings, and a proliferation of different colorations appeared online. The National Museum, the National Art Gallery of the Netherlands, the Rijksmuseum on the right, discovered that no one was buying their postcard of the painting in the gift shop because people didn't recognize the official coloration anymore. and thought that the official coloration was too green. Which one is the real one? Do you know? I think the real one in the yellow milkmaid, the milkmaid, is bottom left, I think. The point is that these institutions then published the high-resolution TIFF version of their painting, of these digitizations, CC0, open license, and said it is our responsibility as the owners, as the custodians of these artworks, to make sure the best quality is represented most easily in the world, because what is most easily accessible is the most easily reused. It is a disservice to these painters if we hide their artwork on their behalf and people use bad versions. Openness is also a question of technical openness. Modern openness is also a question of ability to change. We live in a remix culture world, not a permission culture world, especially for ancient texts and ancient stories that live. They do not get kept once, copyrighted, and never changed again. This is a screenshot from a beautiful film called Sita Sings the Blues, where an American lady made a full film, feature film, retelling the story of the Ramayana. This is after Sita has been rescued. No, this is before Sita was abducted, I should say. And she remixes the story and inserts her own personal story into the original with beautiful and diverse cartoon styles, gives it a feminist reading to a certain degree, and has Sita singing with the backdrop of Annette Hanshaw, a 1930s American jazz singer, about her love and her troubles in love. And to connect those two cultures together is, I think, a fascinating combination. And she made this film available under a CC0 license, no copyright, for two reasons. One, because it's an ancient story. It's not her story originally, so she should not take an ancient story of an entire culture and then say it's my copyright. My version of this story is my copyright. And two, because she had to fight extensively with Sony to get the rights to the out-of-copyright songs of Annette Hanshaw. So having fought that fight, she did not want anyone else in the future to have the same problem of access and re-access to cultural heritage. Stories are meant to be collected, preserved, but live. Nuance is another form of openness, of technical openness, of layers of differing versions of the truth. These are some screenshots from the Wikidata item about the first edition volume of Anne Frank's diary. Familiar with Anne Frank, the teenage girl in... There are various versions of this book, of this publication, and various claimants upon its copyright. And so Wikidata tries to model in structured data formats how these arguments about the truth, I mean, the duration of copyright is a fact. It could only have one answer, right? Well, no. It depends who you ask. When does it go in copyright? It depends on the jurisdiction. So Wikidata allows, and this is the only structured data format that I'm aware of that allows this, competing and conflicting information to exist side by side. It is not a question of data being more true than prose. It's a question of knowing how to interrogate the information you are receiving using your own ability to understand information. That's the difference, but that's where digital humanities is not just data, there is the answer. Digital humanities begins when you make the right question, and now you have to unpick and discover and interpret the knowledge that is being presented to you. Open as consistency as well as nuance. These are the various date formats that exist within one art gallery in the United States that provided a data set to Wikimedia for sharing its high-resolution images to Wikimedia, and we tried to normalize and standardize how they presented that data. And it's just the name and year of the artist within one institution. So by having only free text fields, the data is technically open, but practically not, because it is not reusable, queryable, comparable if the information is provided in multiple formats. You may have seen this data as interoperability. 5-star open data is a concept promulgated by Tim Berners-Lee. The idea that information should be available, well, the availability of information and its openness is on a scale, on a continuity, going straight from the 1-star, what would be considered more like the door is open, here's a document, that's it. Then making it stable, standardized, using an open format, not a proprietary software format, making it linked to each other, and then making it online to be linkable to, and then making it linked to everything else, up to 5-star open data. The openness is on a scale, on a continuum. There's not just a yes or no. Open as machine readable. We've heard about rights statements a couple of times today and yesterday. The idea that there are various forms of copyright status that a thing can exist in copyright, out of copyright, unknown copyright, orphan work, in copyright in one place and out of copyright in another place, indigenous rights, traditional knowledge, other restrictions. We know there are various organizations that will do a digitization deal with a museum and say, we will digitize your collection of family history records in exchange for you not being able to share them to anyone else. Or they will put a contractual agreement on top of copyright. I don't agree with that, but it's very useful to have that information structured somewhere to be findable, not hidden away in a contract document somewhere that you can read, if you can read 100 pages of contract document. So rightsstatements.org, an organization I'm also involved with, as is NIDL and Europeana, tries to at least make machine readable this status from which you can then interrogate how you will use that information. The second tranche of Wikimedia's strategy for the next 10 years and future, along with knowledge as a service, is the concept of knowledge equity. A word that is deliberately confusing or deliberately complex. It is not the same as equality. Not everyone gets the same thing because some people started with more to begin with. I also refer back to the PhD for AI in this point. Knowledge equity is about giving people the ability to access and to share their own culture just as much what they might not have any access before. This is the first page of results of the British Museum's collection of paintings relating to Orissa. Orissa, not Odisha. Because the British Museum's collection of paintings catalogue was written a long time ago. And these paintings are not connected to anything in particular. They are physically in England, and they are not digitally connected to anything either. So the stories they represent, the words literally written on them, but the iconography is not connected to anything in particular, certainly not written in Odia. It's written in English at best. Equally, I would call this a form of digital repatriation. If it's available for the community to connect to and collect digitally and tell the story and connect that story to other pieces of the same culture virtually, that's at least something. Equally, the British Museum does not have a page on its catalogue website for the Elgin marbles in Greek. It does not have a page for the Rosetta Stone in Egyptian Arabic. I think those would be important methods of providing a digital repatriation and knowledge equity to cultural heritage. Wikipedia is not just English and translations. They're all equally valid and can disagree with each other about how to interpret the same story. Also in knowledge equity is the idea of, these are traditional knowledge statements from an organization called Local Contexts, a Canadian-based organization, trying to apply these ideas of openness, machine readability, consistency to traditional knowledge. We have Creative Commons for labels relating to copyright status, and we have rights statements as labels to try and identify different forms of copyright status. This is an attempt to structure and make machine readable what kinds of traditional knowledge, access conditions, or status exist for a work in a cultural collection. It is designed specifically for the Canadian context and would not necessarily be applicable for the Indian or the Australian or the New Zealand Indigenous communities. But the idea here is to try and bring those layers of access and restriction to a digital platform to make them available in the contexts, or at least make the access rights cultural context available to start the conversation rather than just not have any information at all. The second half of my presentation I'd like, which will be much shorter, the second half of my presentation I'd like to compare the different ways some digital libraries refer to the concept of community. It's a word that is used a lot and is considered important by all the digital libraries we've heard about over the last 2 days. But I consider them to be interesting in that each uses the word community in a different way. The NDLI wishes, as we have heard, to integrate some crowdsourcing activities, and NDLI and Wikimedia, particularly CIS, the Center for Internet Studies in India, are working to try and find ways to integrate and support Wikisource inside the NDLI, which is a community crowdsourced project, as we heard about with Ben. And also the NDLI, as you may know, has a particular focus on question papers and solution answers and sets of resources for students and exams, which is an ability where you can log in and you can tag and comment on some of the content in the collection. So the ability to have a personal response or leave notes for yourself is built into the design of the NDLI as a community, at least in the sense of you can write virtual notes on the files that you find, which is one form of the concept. Digital New Zealand has a different manner. It allows you to log in as well to the collections of Digital New Zealand, but their purpose for that is not to provide tagging per se. It is to allow you to collect some of the works, some of the multimedia in their collection, bring it together inside their platform, write contextual labels, descriptions, like an illustrated blog post, for example. They call it stories. You can make your illustrated blog post about the topic that you want to share and publish it publicly based on information inside the platform, which therefore avoids any questions of reuse of information, copyright, accessibility, and the recontextualization of different objects on their platform. So you can do this without having to leave their platform and have your own website, but you can still provide a personal recontextualization or personal storytelling of different parts of their collection in one place and share it to the world. That's a community. Europeana primarily is considered a collection of digital resources as well, but you cannot log into Europeana and tag or make a favorites list or some kind of other method that are like NDLI or Digital New Zealand. With Europeana, the community, as we heard with Harry's presentation yesterday, is more around the organization itself, the professional development, the meetings, the best practices, the sharing of advocacy models, and elections. There is a council, there is an elected members' council with an executive committee, and it has some role and some power in the organization, in the management of the organization of Europeana as an organization. So in this context, the community is meant more in terms of the professional, behind the scenes, the actual organization of the structure, not just the users of the content, also a community. DPLA is trying to do many of these things. It also has a members' governance council, and it has local representatives, local reps. And it also allows you to log in and try and make personal lists or tags and collect items together. So it is wanting to do it in both different ways. And it now has, as of last week, a Wikipedian in-house trying to connect its collections to the wider world. My role in Europeana has been similar for the last few years. Trove at the National Library of Australia is a collection not dissimilar to Digital New Zealand or DPLA of the resources available of many libraries across the country, and is most famous for its newspaper collection, where they are digitized and made available and text searchable and linkable at the article level, which is where their resources have become incredibly used by the Wikipedia community to provide footnotes and references to individual moments in Australian history to reference these facts. I don't want to reference in a Wikipedia article the newspaper. I want to reference that article on that day on that page of the newspaper as a historical fact. And that is where most of Trove's inbound links come from, is Wikipedia's, well, many of Trove's inbound clicks come from Wikipedia article footnotes. This article here about the Emu War in an obscure newspaper called the Argus, which no longer exists, from 1932, is the most cited individual article in Trove because of a footnote in the Wikipedia article. The Australian Army tried to fight a war against the emus, the large flightless birds. They look like ostriches, and lost. I'm not kidding. But Trove's community is that it allows people to log in and fix the OCR text, do text correction, similar to Wikisource, but specifically for newspapers, to fix the OCR text and build a community around that approach. You can also do tags and make your favorite list and download the list of my research topics and books that I want to remember to check out at the local library. But the community built around the newspaper text correction is massive and very engaged, and is built primarily from family historians. A community group that none of the other projects have really thought about as a major group that they want to necessarily meet. Family historians are powerfully enthusiastic people trying to uncover the history of their family, and in the process collect the links and improve the digitization. I would hope in the future that NDLI or the National Library in Calcutta or someone can provide an equivalent service to this digitization process of newspapers for India, because the fact of India being the world's largest democracy and also the world's largest publisher of newspapers, I think, are quite linked. The history of Indian newspapers is extraordinarily diverse and detailed and multilingual. And the fact in Wikimedia we have very limited resources available to tell the story of India from India's perspective, and not just India, but many non-Western cultures and languages and cultures, is a problem we have in a lack of sources available. So most of the time we have to use sources written about a culture, not by a culture. Indian newspapers would be an extraordinarily valuable gift to Wikipedia and to the world if they were available online to be cited in an easily accessible way to provide historical record from the perspective of the people who were involved in that history locally. So I encourage that as a giant task for you. You have digitized some. I know it's not like it hasn't ever been thought of before, but I'm adding my weight to that as a project. And of course, Wikisource as a community, as a digital library community, is one that, as Ben has talked about, and one that sits slightly different to the other ones I have mentioned as official government and national organizations. Wikisource is a bottom-up, crowdsourced community that takes public domain documents and books and publications and transcribes them and sets them side by side, the original image in its original form and a searchable Unicode character side by side for both the original context and the searchability. This is a massive project that already exists in all of the languages that you speak. So if you do have collections of digitized public domain resources and you don't know what to do with them right now, it's not a competition with NDLI, it's an addition. Wikisource is here and available with a local community that wants to work with you already. Thank you.
I wanted to ask, you are just like you showed the digital images of that were being changed over the net. One of the problems I have with Wiki in general is that I don't know what is the truth. Doesn't matter because people can always go and curate it the way they want. And I really don't know, there must have been very good reasons why you must have done it, somebody else has overwritten over you, and I can go through the history. But it doesn't tell me which is the correct one, unless and until a source like that actually puts it and it links it. So what is it that should have been done by your organization and even by Wiki, and that's a question I wanted to ask you also, which is not allowed, is that you should have ensured that there is a way in which a link that is given to the original source, which is an authenticated case, like in the case of these images, is actually not editable, so that it's always sent to the same source. So I know this is an issue. Because what is happening is that
Wikipedia has many mistakes, failures of fact, errors of omission, and errors of false inclusion. False positives, false negatives, and so does everyone else.
Yeah,
the difference
but
is
the images
that we
are a different issue. I'm talking about the
open
images.
about this fact, and that we encourage people to interrogate the sources and use their own minds about how to interrogate and how to read information. We don't pretend, like every other encyclopedia through history, that the authority derives from the name of the author on the front page. The authority of Wikipedia and the links it provides is from the quality of the footnotes and your ability as a scholar of whatever degree of professional ability you have to understand and interrogate that knowledge. This is why Wikipedia is not trying.
I think you're missing my point. My point was that if the original authenticated source is indeed given, that link at least should be not modulated. Like the original one that has been put by the museum. That link, if it is there in the wiki pages, should not be allowed to be edited. Because what if somebody goes and again changes it to some other site where the whole thing is changed? Because if I now think, oh, that is a site,
As I said, the quality of Wikipedia content is not based on the veracity, the truthiness of Wikipedia content is not derived from who put the information there. It is derived from the quality of the information. And this is the difference between... Can I have another?
Maybe we should follow up, but I think that, it's part of Wikipedia's editorial policies that claims need to be sourced. And so if there are missing claims, that's often flagged, and that's a good early cue. But the idea that it must then stick, I mean, the article can evolve. I mean, I think that maybe we should follow up. I think there's more nuance that we should unpack, yeah. Yeah.
But the first source could have been wrong. The first source.
But in this case, the original painting was digitized and put. So they can't be wrong.
No, they can be, because if I digitize and put something and I'm claiming I did it, whereas I did not do it.
So no, if we can keep the versioning of these links, probably periodically some robo or other things can verify it and check. something, but again, it should be human assisted. It cannot be. I think once
writing history.
Some agency puts, yes, this is the final version, then probably it may not be allowed to be changed.
No, there is no such thing as the final version of history.
Yeah.
And just because the museum that currently owns the object, which might be a different culture entirely from the community that made the object, decides that this is the correct answer of that history, that should not be frozen merely because they currently have political and cultural power.
Of course, this is one of the pitfalls of crowdsourcing.
That's one of the advantages of crowdsourcing.
Okay, fine. okay.
I would like to have a question from...
Yeah, one more.
Actually, this is not a question. This is a platform where you are talking about the Wikimedia. So there is one project called Women in Red.
Women in Red, yes.
So I would like you to emphasize on that.
Women in Red, thank you for that, is a community project to make sure that the number of biographies, the quality and quantity of biographies about women are increased relative to the number and proportion of men written in Wikipedia. Wikipedia, like all modern sources, is the result of the historical biases of the sources available. And it recreates those existing biases. So the proportion of biographies of women in English Wikipedia, and it's approximately the same in all Wikipedia languages, is about 10%, 15%, 17%. 17% of all Wikipedia biographies are women. This is a result of this is not to blame existing Wikipedia authors. This is a representation of the fact of what sources are available and more easily distributed. So there is a massive project called Women in Red. Red referring to the link color in a Wikipedia article. If there is no Wikipedia article available, but we have linked to it in advance on the knowledge that one day someone will write a Wikipedia article, the link is red. So making the red links go blue and focusing and trying to uncover the sources for these notable women that just got ignored in history, to rewrite them back into the history, has been incredibly successful, an important task. And I thank you for raising it as a point to redress.
Yeah, the red links are a call to action, really.
Yeah. I think last question. Okay. So if we take the percentage of people questioning, I think if we take the gender percentage, it's more women.
That's not by choice as well. I've been pointing to...
Hi, so my question is actually directed to both of you, because you represent Wikipedia. So I represent a small digital repository of Indian cultural content, and we're also working with NDLI. This is also a question for NDLI. The archival or digitization effort in India is not, or has not been large institutional funding. A lot of digitization, a lot of archival, a lot of that kind of work is happening through small collections, private collectors, similar to your family historians that you pointed out. So bringing them all under a national archive involves a lot of effort from these smaller collectors, smaller archives. They may not have the digital tools available or even the digital capability to even contribute or understand what Wikisource is or how they would incorporate it or even have that knowledge available. So what is it that NDLI is doing or Wikipedia is doing, or do you have some sort of workflow for these smaller collections? To your example of newspapers, there's also no sari, a national sari museum, for example, in India. There are small private collectors that have beautiful, very, very rich collections on this. There are newer archives that are coming out on the queer archives in India. There are, communal violence, tribal histories, etc. All of these are very, very small efforts, and they may not even be thinking of something the way Wikipedia is or NDLI is. So what is the work that's happening to get all of us together and feed it in? And also raise our work, to this scale so that other people can see it. Thank you.
This effort fits under the definition of what we would call knowledge equity. the attempt to try and redress historical biases in the content by virtue of talking to the larger, the richer, the more available content and communities. Wikimedia projects don't give a faster pipeline to bigger institutions because they are official or richer or bigger. We have an equally fast or slow pipeline for everyone, which is a great leveler. Equally, the content on the eventual website, on Wikisource, Wikidata, Wikipedia, doesn't matter the authority and the status of the institution that provided it. So small libraries and archives and collections are equally welcome, and in fact, more welcome. The workflow is the same for everyone. Find a community member or go to the front page, click upload, have problems, write on the talk page, ask for help, find a community member in your local city and build a relationship with the existing community or read the documentation yourself. There is no special access if you pay more money. By virtue of being faster, by being there first and building a relationship with the community, your content becomes more visible, more usable, more seen, which builds a virtuous cycle of access and reuse and relevance and access and reuse and relevance and deep linking across the internet. So we would very much encourage those kinds of archives you're referring to contact, just write on the discussion page of the main page and say, hi, I'm an archive that has this stuff. Can someone work with me? They might not be local, they might be international.
Okay, okay, you can quickly add to that. Okay, yeah, so, fine. I think you can continue the discussion during the break. Again,
sir, permit me to clarify one thing. Like we have that now Nehru Memorial Museum, they have digitized the newspapers, and we have it at, I think, at National Archives. The digitization of the papers has been done. Only thing is they are not integrated with the platform. Maybe over sometime we will be having that thing integrated.
For yourself, or for the public on the internet. That makes the difference.
That's it. Like, only thing is we have to put it on the portal or do something which can be accessible to everyone.
Okay.
There are many portals that are, including Wikisource and the Internet Archive, that let you upload your own content without an institutional relationship.
Maybe shortly we'll be having it.
Internet Archive might be the easiest in terms of no institutional relationship required for digital content, and they will accept all content regardless of its curatorial level.
Okay, I would like to thank NDLI and especially Professor Das for giving me the unpleasant job of chasing the speakers and the participants in questioning the speakers. But in any case, I would like to compensate that with kind of mementos to my speakers who have done a wonderful job.